This is the story of two brothers who spent their lives competing. They went in separate directions, and their feud created two massive businesses that you've probably heard of. Today's story is called When Opposites Attract.
Season 2 of the story features 12 trailblazers who started a business that changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, the world's #1 customer relationship management platform. More than 150,000 businesses are using Salesforce to blaze their own trails to success. And now, on to the story.
Addy was home at last. He walked in the door of his parents' house and sank down into the couch. He was alive and still had his eyes and limbs. The past few years he had spent fighting in World War I. Those years had taken everything he had just to survive. Addy looked around his parents' house. Not much had changed. His parents were cobblers in Germany, and so was his brother Rudy. Their family made and sold slippers. When Addy went to fight in the war, Rudy had stayed behind to work in their parents' business. The Dasslers were a hard-working family, but they didn't have much to show for it. When Addy returned home, he assumed he and Rudy were going to talk and reconnect. But Rudy was distant, and Addy couldn't seem to connect with him. It hurt. He'd been through hell in World War I. He expected the homecoming to be a joyous day, but it wasn't. Addy and Rudy were no longer on the same page. Addy was tired of wars and dictators, and meanwhile, Rudy seemed to be eager for both. It wasn't that surprising. He and Rudy had been competing ever since they were born. They were both driven, and it wasn't long before their parents were breaking up their fights. From then on, the boys turned to sports to settle their differences. Addy was the clear winner, and Rudy lost his interest in sports soon after, and then he turned to politics. Meanwhile, Addy started to combine his love of sports with his family's knowledge of slippers and shoes. As a boy, he always wondered why there weren't different shoes for different types of sports. When Addy listened to his family talk at night about work, he realized that making slippers wasn't for him. Slippers were okay, but there was so much more they could be making. He thought back to his childhood, where he had visions of all kinds of new shoes, customized to the exact sport or specification of the wearer. Addy's time in the war had taught him two things. Number one, he could overcome just about anything. And number two, life wasn't promised, and each person only had a small window of time to figure out what was going on and how to do something that mattered. Addy knew he was lucky to be alive, and the thought of having to work with Rudy all day wasn't exactly how he wanted to spend his life. Addy decided that from that moment forward, he was going to try to make the shoes that he'd envisioned as a young boy. The next few weeks, he collected all the bits and pieces of cloth and materials from his leftover military gear and supplies. Addy took all of them into his family's laundry room and got to work. After 3 weeks, he came marching out of the laundry room with a grin on his face and a completed prototype. In his hands were the shoes that he'd seen in his imagination. He was glowing with pride. He passed them to Rudy, who studied them. Rudy tried to show how unimpressed he was with Addy's creation. Addy's parents, meanwhile, were impressed, and his father instantly offered him support and business contacts. Addy was soon up and running, selling his shoes, and they were a local hit. Rudy could hardly believe his brother's success. Addy's original pair of shoes had come straight out of their mother's laundry room. Now everyone in town wanted a pair. Addy had not only survived the war, but now he was thriving. His business was booming. Rudy watched it all, and resentment formed in his mind. It wasn't fair. Rudy was the older one, and he should have come up with the idea. At the same time, Rudy's progress in Germany's National Socialist Party was stalling, and he didn't see any opportunities to advance. Meanwhile, Addy had more opportunity than he knew what to do with. Rudy swallowed his pride and asked Addy for a job. Addy was glad to see that his brother was moving out of politics and into business. The two brothers put aside their differences and got to work. Addy was the maker, and Rudy was the salesman. They were both good at what they did. After they joined forces, Addy was thrilled. Finally, this was the type of reconnection he'd been hoping for. Years passed, and the brothers' shoe business took off. Addy designed and made the shoes, while the ever-outspoken Rudy sold them. But soon, minor disagreements cropped up. Their relationship was on the rocks again. It didn't help that their wives hated each other. On top of it all, Rudy was becoming obsessed with the new leader of the National Socialist Party. Addy warned his brother he couldn't stand this new leader. He had to be dangerous. Tensions were growing all around the world, and Addy hoped that the coming Olympic Games would be a way to let off some steam. At the Games, one of the star athletes wore their shoes and won 4 gold medals. The brothers looked on in awe as everyone stared at the winner and his shoes. The Olympics helped sales at their business, but they didn't bring the world closer together. Almost overnight, World War II started, and then everything was different. Addie was called back into the military, and Rudy was drafted. The authorities determined that Addie was vital to their shoe business, which was vital to the war effort, so Addie was sent home. Rudy wasn't so lucky. Rudy became paranoid and suspected that his brother was the one who got him drafted. He thought that there was a plan to keep him far away from the shoe factory. With him out of the picture, he suspected that Addie and his wife were going to seize control of the company. The thought made Rudy sick. On top of that, he had no choice but to travel east to fight the Red Army. Along the way, he became so convinced that his brother was going to take the business that he deserted and tried to make it home. His escape attempt failed. He was caught and sent to the Dachau concentration camp. Rudy's soul was shattered. There was a real possibility that he was never going to see his wife, parents, or even his brother ever again. And then, for the first time in what felt like forever, something wonderful happened to Rudy. The Allies won. United States and British troops freed him on his way to the concentration camp. After the war, Rudy returned home. War turned Addie into a better man, but they had made Rudy into a worse one. Now he was angry and paranoid, and he wasn't going back into business with his brother. Rudy pulled out of the shoe factory for good, much to Addie's relief. Rudy got to work and founded his own business across town. It was a shoe factory. Then came the ultimate betrayal. Rudy went back to their company and convinced the entire sales team to come with him. They believed his side of the story and left. Lucky for Addie, in Rudy's absence, Addie's wife Kathy had stepped up and filled in his role. It turned out she did a much better job than Rudy, and her diplomacy and friendliness put their business partners at ease. She helped free Addie up so he could design and make new shoes, while she sold them. Years passed. Before long, the brothers' town was divided into two. There were those who loved Addie's shoes, and there were those that loved Rudy's shoes. You couldn't pick both. You absolutely had to pick a side. Some restaurants even refused to serve customers who wore Addie's shoes, and some restaurants wouldn't let anybody in who wore Rudy's. Marriage across company lines was strictly forbidden. The competition got so fierce that the brothers' town became known as the Town of Bent Necks. It was called that because everybody was staring down at each other's shoes. It's actually where the phrase looking down on someone came from. I'm just kidding about that last part. As the years rolled on and their businesses grew, Addie and Rudy never reconciled. Addie did his best to put the past behind him and revitalize his business. He wanted a new feel for it. Originally, the business had been named after his family name, but it never sounded quite right. So to celebrate being free of his brother and the Nazi Party, he needed to rename his company, and fast. He decided to combine his last name, Dassler, with his first. The result? Adidas. Adidas was soon everywhere, and sports teams were famous for pulling Addie into their pictures whenever their shoes helped them win. Rudy tried to do the same thing, but he couldn't get it quite right. Rudassler, Ruda? They all sounded horrible, so he settled on a simple name, Puma. Adidas and Puma continued to be fierce rivals, even up until the death of Addie and Rudy. The brothers were buried in the same cemetery, as far away from each other as possible. Life doesn't have to be one long competition or grudge match. Competition can be fun, but so is collaborating with friends and family to build something that matters. Who knows what the brothers could have built if they chose to devote all of their energies into building the same business. The feud between the two businesses finally ended in 2009 when the employees of Adidas and Puma chose to get together for the first time for a friendly game of soccer. Today, both companies are trailblazers in the sportswear industry. That's their story. What's yours going to be?
Thank you for listening to this episode of The Story. We have an exclusive giveaway for our listeners, 2 free tickets to Salesforce Connections in Chicago on June 12th through June 14th. Salesforce Connections is the digital marketing, commerce, and customer service event of the year. You'll learn how to create personalized experiences at every touchpoint and deliver service that drives growth and exceeds consumer expectations. Head to thestorypodcast.com and enter to win today. That's thestorypodcast.com. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Salesforce, for sharing these stories of business trailblazers who changed the world.
If you like this episode of The Story, please help spread these stories by telling one friend. Also, you can hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Story is created by our team here at The Mission. The Mission is your #1 source for accelerated learning. To get more stories and podcasts like this and our world-class newsletter, subscribe at themission.co. That's themission.co. See you next time.